Hi, welcome back. Our previous lesson was on part two of certain prices when you have market power. Today we'll be looking at part three of the same topic. So in our previous lessons, we saw that firms have two analytical tools to help them evaluate the trade-off between selling higher quantities and charging higher prices. The first two that we looked at is the firm's demand curve, where we saw that firms with lower market power, they have a relatively more elastic demand curve, and firms with higher market power have a relatively less elastic demand curve. Now, the second two that we looked at was the marginal revenue curve, where we saw that marginal revenue curve typically reflect the output effect and the discount effect. So it's simply a reflection of the output effect, which is the price that you get from selling an additional unit, and the discount effect, which is the change in the price times the quantity sold. So for every additional unit that you sell, the marginal revenue is an embodiment of the price that you get from selling that unit minus how much you have to cut your prices to sell that additional unit. And this is multiplied by the quantity of unit that you sell at that new price. So these two effects account for the shape of the marginal revenue curve. Now we are going to use these two tools to analyze how firms decide on quantity and the price that they should charge. So the first thing we are going to look at is the rational rule for sellers. The rational rule for sellers in deciding how to choose quantity is that they sell up to the point where the marginal cost of an extra unit is at least as large as the price. So remember that when firms are making decisions, they are always looking at cost versus benefit. So the benefit of selling an additional unit is price that you get for that additional unit, and then the cost of producing that additional unit is the marginal cost. So the rational rule for sellers suggests that firms should sell to the point where the marginal cost of producing that additional unit is equal to the price that they get from selling that unit. So what the rational rule for sellers means is that sellers should only sell an additional unit if doing so will boost the revenue by at least as much as it boosts your cost. So let's look at this curve. We have the price or the marginal revenue on this curve, and then we have the quantity on the horizontal axis. So if we assume that firm's marginal cost is fixed, then we have this as 2,000. So in this example, the firm's demand curve is represented by this curve, and the marginal revenue curve is represented by this curve. The rational rule for sellers is to keep producing until your marginal cost is equal to your marginal revenue. Now we know that the marginal cost is simply the cost of producing an additional unit. So the marginal benefit in this case is also equal to your marginal revenue. So for firms to be able to make a decision, then it means that they should sell up to the point where the additional cost is equal to the additional revenue. So if we look at this curve, because our marginal cost is fixed, we don't have to worry about it changing. But our marginal revenue curve is downward sloping. Now, at this point, if we represent it by point A, is where the marginal cost curve intersects our marginal revenue curve. In deciding how much to produce, firms are simply going to produce up to the point where it costs them as much as they get in terms of revenue. Firms are now going to look at this point A here and trace it down to the quantity. So in our example, this particular firm is going to sell 3 units of this product because at this 3 units, the marginal cost of producing one extra unit is equal to the marginal revenue that the firm gets from selling that extra unit. So the rational rule for sellers in choosing the quantity sold suggests that this firm in this example should sell 3 units. Now that the firm knows how many units of the good to produce, what then will be the price that the firm will charge? So let's move on to choosing the price that a firm will charge. So in deciding what price to sell, a firm should always charge the highest possible price as long as it can sell the quantity which is at the point where the marginal revenue is equal to the marginal cost. Now remember that for firms, if they had the option, they would charge the highest possible price and get the highest possible profit. But most of them are restricted by the market forces and are restricted by their production functions and many other variables that we cannot account for. In this example, in choosing the price that the firm should charge, the first thing that they have to look at is the quantity. So we've now decided that at point A, in which the marginal revenue is equal to the marginal cost, at that point, the firm should produce 3 units of the good. So when the firm knows the quantity that it should produce, all it has to do is trace that quantity to a demand curve. The price that the firm should charge is 2,200. So this can just be obtained by looking up at the demand curve for the specific quantity that a firm has decided to produce. So I have to point out that in looking at the price that you need to charge, a lot of people might simply look at the marginal revenue curve. So it's easy to just say that this is the quantity, let's trace it to the marginal revenue curve, and this will be the price that the firm will charge. When firms are deciding the price that they should charge, what they take into account is the demand curve. So remember that a firm's demand curve, it reflects consumers' willingness to pay for a good. It reflects the prices that consumers are willing and able to pay for a good. So when firms want to make the decision of choosing the price that they should charge, they usually use the demand curve and not the marginal revenue curve. So once you have the optimal quantity, you're going to trace this to the firm's demand curve, and then corresponding price is the price that the firm will charge. So this is all that we have on our lesson on how firms choose quantity and how firms choose price when they have some market power. Our next lesson will be on the problem with market power. If you enjoyed today's lesson, consider subscribing. Thank you.